Okay. Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut, continuing our series on the spiritual geography of the land of Israel. Tonight, we're going to do the 4 holy cities of Israel. But I'll remind everyone, this is not a series about history. It's not Tanakh. It's the spiritual geography of Eretz Yisrael. So I'm going to go through these 4 cities and really, as much as possible, try to focus on different topographical elements of these cities or the spiritual geography of these cities with a little bit of history fit in. So the first thing is, I think many people have heard of this idea of the 4 holy cities of Israel. But interestingly enough, this is a relatively new concept. It's only been a couple hundred years that there's been a focus or just the whole idea of 4 holy cities of Israel. It's not really an ancient idea per se. It's relatively recent. But one of the ideas that is connected to the 4 cities are the 4 elements. And so we're going to mention that as we do each city. We're going to start from up north. We're going to do Tzfat, and then Tiberia, and then we're going to leave Jerusalem for the end because I have the most material about it, and then Hebron. Those are the 4 cities: Tzfat, Tiberia, excuse me, Hebron, and Yerushalayim. And the correspondence to the elements are really very clear. That Tzfat is connected to air. Anyone who's been to Tzfat, this is like a no-brainer. Tzfat is sitting perched on the top of this mountain with beautiful views, and you feel very ethereal. There's no doubt that there is an ethereal, airy, spiritual feeling that when you're in Tzfat. So let's learn a little bit about Tzfat, but especially the topography. And that's the main thing. The main thing is the name Tzfat. It means an overview, a lookout, a place that you could see in every direction or in a long way in one direction. So that is the name Tzfat. We're going to come up with the same root when we get to Yerushalayim, Harat Sofim. That's where the Hebrew University is. Harat Sofim means the mountain with the view, the ability to see a wide expanse. So that's the actual meaning of Tzfat. This name does not appear in the Tanakh. And so many people think, at least, that one of the places that's mentioned in Josephus, he was a Jew who in a certain way became we'll call it a turncoat, and worked with the Romans. But he wrote what many people feel is a very, very accurate history of the times. And he mentions a place called Seth, that they think that this is the place of Tzfat. Tzfat is in the territory of Naphtali. Hopefully, at some point, we will get to a connection of the tribes and their inheritances in the land of Israel. Tzfat is part of the inheritance of Naphtali, which is really the upper Galil. And what's interesting is the gematria of Naphtali is exactly the same as Tzfat, 570. They have the same gematria. And so in a certain way, Tzfat is the most important city in the area of Naphtali. So as I said, as far as the spiritual geography, is the idea that Tzfat is perched, the city literally sits at the top of a mountain. And we already discussed that across from Tzfat is Har Meron. And in between is a valley, and it's popularly called Wadi Amud. The Wadi means a valley in Arabic, Wadi Amud. And we discussed how many people walk between Tzfat and Meron, these two mountains with this beautiful valley in between, with a stream running through it. So, first of all, Tzfat sits almost 1,000 meters over sea level, around 3,074 feet. And we learned that Meron, until we took possession of the Hermon, Meron was the tallest mountain in Israel. So here you have these two peaks with this valley in between. And that really defines this whole area. I believe I mentioned that when you go to the top of Har Meron, that's where the army is with some of the most advanced radar. But there's a trail up there called the Peak Trail that you can walk literally 360 degrees around the top of the mountain with incredible views in every direction. So to tell a few stories, though, that are connected to Tzfat and the land around it, is that we know that in the mid-1500s, there was an incredible gathering of Torah scholars, but especially those that were involved with the learning of Kabbalah. And this was called the Golden Age of Tzfat. It had a major impact to this day on all of Jewish thought. And the premier Kabbalist of Tzfat in that area was the Arizal. And before him was the Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero. And one of the things that the Arizal was known for is, without going into the whole story of the Arizal, but he was one of the most unique, influential people in all of Jewish history, because the Torah that he revealed just was revolutionary. And to this day, it influences every aspect of Jewish thought. But the amazing thing is, many people don't realize this, he was only in Tzfat for 2.5 years. Before that, he lived in Egypt, and he was totally hidden. He wasn't known, and he came to Tzfat, and there he became known for maybe as little as 2 years. But the amount of Torah that he shared in those 2 years was revolutionary. But a beautiful thing about it is he was convinced to take on around 20 students. That's all that were in his inner circle. We'll learn a story tonight about someone who wanted to be, but he was very, very particular about who he felt was ready to hear the kind of Torah that he's giving over. And most of the Torah that he gave over was out in nature, in the area around Tzfat. And one of the reasons for this is that he hinted very, very clearly that he was a reincarnation of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And one story is he brought his students to Meron, where Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is buried. Remember, that's just right across the mountain from Tzfat. And while they were like right near the burial site, he sat down the students, and the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai only had around 10 students. And he sat the students in a circle around him in a way to make them understand that they were all also reincarnations of the students of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and he sat them in the same way that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai sat his students. And the reason I'm telling you this is because when you read the Zohar, so much of the Zohar takes place out in nature. And the typical way that a subject is introduced is Rabbi Shimon was walking along the way, and his son, Reb Elazar, was with him, and Reb Abba, and Reb Yossi, and Reb Yehuda. And they began to discuss a certain verse, and before you know it, they're deep into learning. But it repeats this over and over again. The idea of Rabbi Shimon was walking along the way. And so the Arizal, in a certain way, I wouldn't say copied that, but he did a similar thing with his students, that they would go out, they would sit under a tree, and he would teach them. And so many of the stories about the Arizal, which we are not going to go into because that's not the subject at hand, take place outside. Now, one of them that has to do with the spiritual geography is that up north around Tzfat, there are many, 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 many grave sites of holy tzaddikim all around Tzfat. And some of them are known, like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. There's an ancient and authentic tradition that's where he is buried. But according to the stories about the Arizal, he would be out in nature with his students, and sometimes he would stop, he would fall to the ground, and he would lay there as if listening, or I'll say like picking up vibes. And he would get up and say, so-and-so is buried here. And many of the famous grave sites in the north of Israel were identified by the Arizal through what's called Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration bordering on prophecy. But this, I felt, fits in with the spiritual geography, is because so many tzaddikim are buried, but the way that the Arizal revealed it was very, very mystical, very, very, very spiritual. Now, one of the connections we can make to the geography of Tzfat is a practice that we have to this day. Many people know that when we daven Kabbalat Shabbat, when we usher in the Shabbat, so Kabbalat Shabbat was formulated in Tzfat. It's about around 500 years old. Before that, there was no such thing as Kabbalat Shabbat, as far as a prayer service. It was initiated by the Arizal and the circle of Kabbalists around him, where they would recite 6 different psalms. And then the 7th is Lecha Dodi, which was composed by one of the Kabbalists in the circle of the Arizal, Rabbi Alkabetz, Shlomo Alkabetz. He is buried right next to the Arizal. And the Ramak, who I mentioned before, is buried at the foot of the Arizal. It's actually the opposite, because the Ramak was buried first, and then the Arizal is at the head of the Ramak. But to this day, when we daven Kabbalat Shabbat, we turn to the west, and when we say Boi Kala, we greet the Shabbos bride, and we kind of bow to the west as if we're greeting someone coming in. And that whole tradition began in Tzfat, but the way that they did it, they didn't do it in a synagogue. They went out to the fields outside of Tzfat, and they greeted the Shabbos bride out in nature. And so, until this day, in shuls all over the world, we turn to greet the Shabbos bride in memory of how the Arizal and the circle of Kabbalists did it when they initiated Kabbalat Shabbat. So one story is that one of the great scholars of Tzfat, he was called the Alshech, and he wanted to be part of this small circle of students of the Arizal. But the Arizal did not let everyone be a student. And it wasn't because they weren't great scholars. His Kabbalah was very, very unique, and he didn't feel it was right for everyone. And so even great scholars, he would say, I'm sorry, you're a great scholar in of yourself. You're a great student of Kabbalah. Just continue in your path. And so one of them was Moshe Alshech. There is a shul in Tzfat to this day from the time of the Alshech. And he kept on begging the Arizal. And so the Arizal said, okay, but we'll kind of like do a test to see if it's right from heaven. When we go out to greet the Shabbos bride, you can join us, but if you fall asleep, that's a sign from heaven that the type of Torah that I'm teaching, it's not for you. And so the Alshech was very excited. He's going to be able to join the Arizal. And so he knew where they went out to greet the Shabbos bride. So he thought to himself, I'm going to be so prepared. I'm going to go before them, and I'll already be there. Just kind of showed how excited I am and enthusiastic. to be part of this learning group. And so he goes, and he knew where they would be, and he is there early, and he's a little tired. So there's a tree, and he puts his back to the tree and, says to himself, I'll just rest for a few minutes. So what happens? He completely falls asleep. The Arizal and all of the people with him come past the tree, and they want to wake him up. And the Arizal says, no, don't wake him up. And they go past, they greet the Shabbos bride, they come back, and then the Ari says, okay, you can wake him up now. It was getting dark. You couldn't leave him out there in the dark. So they wake him up, and he realizes for some reason it's not from heaven that I should join the group learning with the Arizal. But we should know that it sounds a little bit like a put down. It wasn't. The Alshech used to teach a Shabbos class at the encouragement of the Arizal. And the Arizal went every week and listened to him. And not out of politeness. The Arizal was a great scholar, great speaker. And so he showed the Alshech it's not any kind of rebuke whatsoever. And a similar story happens with Rabbi Yosef Karo. Rabbi Yosef Karo is the author of the Shulchan Aruch, one of the greatest in Jewish history to this day. The Shulchan Aruch is the backbone of Jewish law. And he was twice the age of the Arizal. And he desperately wanted to join the Arizal's group. And the same thing. He said, and many people don't know this, but Rabbi Yosef Karo was a great Kabbalist, even though we know him as a legalist, as a formulator of halacha. He wrote books of Kabbalah. And there was a similar story where he comes to a lecture of the Arizal, and the Arizal basically said, as long as you don't fall asleep. So let's imagine he drank like 10 cups of coffee to stay awake. The first word the Arizal says, he went into this deep sleep. And the same thing, he woke up as the Arizal finished, and he understood that he had his own path. So here I'm just trying to integrate the nature around Tzfat. Again, anyone who's been to Tzfat knows how beautiful it is to walk around the outskirts of Tzfat and Wadi Amud. One last thing, I want to go back to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, because one of the most mysterious, enigmatic, mystical parts of the Zohar is called the Idra Rabbah. The Idra Rabbah means the great gathering, or some say the gathering at the threshing floor. And it's a whole story. It's Rabbi Shimon and 9 of his students. And it's where he gives over these deep, deep Torahs. But I'm mentioning it because it says that it happened outside. It says in a field near the trees outside of Tzfat. Now, to this day, there is a cave between Tzfat and Meron, and it's a very small cave. But when you go in, there's a plaque that says this is the place of the Idra Rabbah. This is the place where Rabbi Shimon sat with his students and learned these deep, deep secrets. In the Idra Rabbah, it does not mention a cave, but it does say they were out in the fields near the trees. It doesn't mean it couldn't have been in a cave. It could be that and it's a natural cave. And we go there every year. I always visit this place. And there's another place. There's a forest outside between Tzfat and Meron. Today it's called the Baal Shem Tov Forest. Obviously, it was really only planted. These are old trees, though. These are natural trees, but obviously the Baal Shem Tov is after the Arizal. And so there is another, it's not a cave. It's a semicircle of stones, natural stones, that is an outcropping from the earth, but it's in a semicircle. And another section of the Zohar called the Safra Tzniuta, literally the book of modesty, but it also means hidden. Modest means hidden. And in the book, it mentions that the teachings were given over in a place of an outcropping of natural rocks in a semicircle. And so someone at a certain point built a building over it. And there also, when you go in, it says, this is the place of the Safra Tzniuta. I also go there every time I go up north. And Yossi HaPekian is actually buried there. Yossi HaPekian is buried, in the middle of this semicircle of stones. So that, I hope, is a taste of Tzfat and the element of air, spirituality, elevation, and the holiness of the city. Next, we'll go to Tiberia. Tiberia, of course, is connected to water, one of the four elements. Tzfat is air. Tiberia is obviously water. It is a city on Lake Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee. And the name Tiberius is not a Jewish name. It is actually the Roman emperor who established the city. And that's why it's called Tiberias to this day. It's interesting, in the Talmud, though, they make a play on words. Now, this is an important thing, because the names of the months that we use to this day came from Babylonia and Persia. They're not Jewish names. And yet, we find allusions to Jewish concepts in these names. So the same thing, Tiberius is connected to the word tabor, which is a belly button. Now, we actually learned that there is a mountain in Israel called Har Tabor, because it is like a belly button. The land around it is completely flat. And all of a sudden, you have this huge round mountain, just like as it were coming out of nowhere. It's not like in a mountain range or anything. And so there it's called like the belly button mountain. But they also said that Tiberia is because Tiberia, it's not as low as the Dead Sea, but it is below sea level, and it's water. So it's the idea of the womb, and the belly button is really coming from the umbilical cord. That's what's left from the umbilical cord. So there was this connection, and of course, in the womb is the embryonic fluid. So that is like a kind of like a play on words as the meaning of Tiberia. But it's understood that in the book of Yoshua, that Tiberia is the place of ancient Rakat. In other words, it wasn't only that the emperor of Rome happened to come and set up a city just out of nowhere. Apparently, the original Tiberia was a place called Rakat. And so there's been continual population there, going all the way back to Yoshua. Now, it makes sense to have a settlement on the only large body of water in Israel, is Yam Kinneret. So that makes perfect sense. We mentioned already that in Tiberia and the surroundings are hot springs. There are many, many hot springs. One is actually in the city itself, and they built a whole building around it, and people go there to bathe. And across the Kinneret is Hamat Gader, which is another famous hot springs. Now, one of the unique things of Tiberia, because there's an ancient cemetery in Tiberia, and also a very, very famous person is buried there outside of the cemetery, but near, and it's Rebbe Meir, sometimes referred to Rebbe Meir Baal HaNes. Rebbe Meir, the master of miracles. So again, this is not a history class. I'm just trying to get to the geography. But you'll see in the ancient cemetery, you'll see in Rebbe Meir Baal HaNes, and you'll see in buildings all over Tiberia, black stone. And also because Tiberia and Yam Kinneret is across from the Golan Heights. And so all around the Golan Heights, especially in different archaeological digs, most of the stone is black stone. And the reason for that is that part of the country, going back to primordial times, was very volcanic. And so the black stone is what's left of the era of live, active volcanoes. And so you see it all over the Golan Heights. And Tiberia is really the only city, I think in Katsrin, Louis can correct me later, I think in Katsrin also, where they have extensive archaeological dig. It's basically mostly black stone. And you'll just see, not just stones for buildings, you'll see all over the Golan, just from the earth. So that's an important connection to understanding the geography of Tiberia. Just a little of the history. Why are we calling it a holy city? What happened here? We know from Sfat. So we had the whole golden age of the Kabbalah. So what is it about Tiberia that we would call it a holy city? Well, the answer is, again, at that point, it was already called Tiberias. And that is that after the destruction of the Second Temple, we have to understand that the Sanhedrin, the holy court, the Supreme Court of Israel, was situated on the Temple Mount, along with the temple. But once the temple was destroyed, the place of the Sanhedrin was also destroyed, and they went into exile. But for a certain amount of time, the Sanhedrin met in Tiberias. And therefore, it took, and obviously, the Sanhedrin is made up of 70 of the greatest scholars of the generation. And so Tiberia was populated and became known as a place of Torah. Along with that is in Tiberia and the surrounding area was really like the cradle of what's called the Jerusalem Talmud. Many people are not aware that we really have two Talmuds. One is the Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, and we have the Jerusalem Talmud. And even though it's called the Jerusalem Talmud, a good part of it was compiled up north near Tiberia. And that was in the 2nd century. In the 2nd century, that's when the Sanhedrin continued to exist. The Sanhedrin existed till the 4th century. Even though it was no longer in Jerusalem, it wasn't always in the same place, but the Sanhedrin continued to function until the 4th century. So now I just want to tell two stories that will be connected to the geography of Tiberia. One is that going back to the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria. So his main student was Rabbi Chaim Vital. And in fact, he came to Tzfat really only to teach him, because he was told in Egypt by none other than Eliyahu Navi, Elijah the prophet, that it was time for him to share the Torah that he had been learning. The Arizal was perfectly happy to stay hidden, unknown in Egypt. But Eliyahu Navi said, you've been taught all of this from heaven to give it over. But really, you only have to give it over to one person. And he will popularize your Torah. Not popularize, but he will make known your Torah. The Arizal didn't write anything except for a couple of poems that we sing on Shabbat. He didn't write anything. Everything we know really is coming from Rabbi Chaim Vital. But Rabbi Chaim Vital, who was a genius of geniuses, had a really hard time grasping the incredibly deep teachings of the Arizal. And so the Arizal said, okay, we're going to take care of that. So they're up in Sfat. They come down to Yam Kinneret, and they take a boat, and they go somewhere near the middle of Yam Kinneret, and the Arizal takes a cup of water, and he says to Rabbi Chaim Vital, drink this water, and if you do, then you'll be able to understand the Torah that I'm giving over. And he added that this water is from the well of Miriam. And according to this, call it story, tradition, legend, however we want to say it, the Rabbi Chaim Vital drank from the water, And after that, he was able, in great measure, there are many times Rabbi Chaim Vital says, I heard this over from the Arizal, and he records it, and he says, but I didn't merit to learn the depths of what I'm giving over here. But in great measure, he was able to understand. And like I said, everything we know of the teachings of the Arizal came through Rabbi Chaim Vital. I won't say everything. The vast majority of everything that we know came from Chaim Vital. So here, to this day, there is, now obviously the Arizal already had a tradition that the well of Miriam somehow was transported from the Sinai desert, which according to tradition is where the water came from to feed, to give drink to everyone in Israel that was in the desert for 40 years. So again, for those who have my book on water, the significance of water in Jewish tradition, there's a whole chapter about the well of Miriam. But this story is a very, very deep story. And I know that on the what's called the yurt site of Miriam, which according to tradition is the 10th of Nisan, every year there's women who go up to Yam Kinneret and do whatever they do, have a whole seminar to honor Miriam, and this idea that somehow this water of Miriam has been transplanted into the Yam Kinneret. Okay, now we are going to move to Hebron. Hebron is the third of the holy cities. And in a certain way, this is the most, along with Jerusalem, the most ancient, because Sfat, in a certain way, becomes a holy city because of the Kabbalists of the 1500s, and Tiberia because of 2,000 years ago, the Sanhedrin and the Jerusalem Talmud. But Hebron, that is where Avram, Yitzhak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Leah are buried, and according to tradition, along with Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve. And so Hebron, being a holy city, plus Avram and Sarah, the two places that they lived the most were Hebron and Beersheba when they came to Israel. And so the holiness of Hebron goes back 3,700 years. In a certain way, Jerusalem goes even further because, according to tradition, Adam and Chava came to Jerusalem. Noach came to Jerusalem. The son of Noach, Shem, came to Jerusalem even before Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. So Hebron is connected to earth. And we'll see that Jerusalem is connected to fire. What's the connection with the earth? Well, the connection is the fact that our patriarchs and matriarchs, along with Adam and Eve, are buried in the earth, in Hebron. The first Jew to die was Sarah, and she's the first Jew to be buried. And then we have a whole parsha called Chayei Sarah in the book of Bereshit about Sarah passing away and the whole story of how Avram purchases the cave of Machpelah. So first of all, in the Torah, Hebron has another name, and that is Kiryat Arba. And Rashi gives two different reasons why is it called Kiryat Arba? For those who know, there is a small but very, very determined and strong Jewish settlement in Hebron. It's 95% Arab, but there is a whole section of Hebron that is Jewish. But next to Hebron is the settlement called Kiryat Arba, named after its name in the Torah. And I'm not sure, but I think around 5,000 people live in Kiryat Arba. It's in walking distance to Hebron. Many people walk every Shabbos to pray in Hebron. So here we see the connection to earth. Now, Hebron comes from the word chibur, which means to be connected. And so here there is a tradition that Hebron is the chibur, the connection between this world and the world to come. Just like Jerusalem is the connection between the lower Jerusalem, Yerushalayim Shel Mata, and the heavenly Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim Shel Mala. That we'll get to when we get to Jerusalem. I'm seeing from the time that we will save Jerusalem for next week. But in Chayei Sarah is the whole story of how Avram buys this cave. Now, why is it called Machpelah? So Machpelah comes from the word kaful, double. It's considered a double cave, not one next to each other, but one on top of each other. Today, at some point, the Muslims built a huge building around the grave sites of our patriarchs and matriarchs. So we have to understand that in the Quran, our patriarchs and matriarchs are considered holy people. They're prophets, accepted prophets in Islam. And so they built this huge building around the grave sites. And so when you go there, you go in, and they have places where it says, this is where Avram is buried, this is where Yitzhak, this is where Sarah. But everyone knows that they're in the cave below, that people do not have access. There are many, many stories over the years of people who did manage to go into the lower cave where they are actually buried. So it's called Machpelah because of the double nature of the cave. Now, Hebron is in we'll call them the mountains. Remember, when we talk about mountains in Israel, they are relatively, except for Hermon, they're relatively small, but nonetheless, it's very hilly and mountainous around Hebron. Hebron itself is built on a series of hills. It's not flat. So I want to give over a certain Rashi, because here we'll see the spiritual geography of Hebron is when Yaakov sends Yosef to check on his brothers. This is already after Yosef has revealed 2 dreams to his brothers, which made them very, very jealous and angry, because it sounds like Yosef is saying, you'll all bow down to me one day. I'm going to be the leader. And so the brothers already, they even used the word hated Yosef. Nonetheless, Yaakov sends Yosef to check on his brothers. And in the Torah, it says he sent him from Emek Chevron, from the valley of Chevron. Now, first of all, it's understood that they weren't near Chevron. When this whole incident happened, it appears that they were more up north. And so there's a question, what does it mean he sent him from the valley of Chevron? So Rashi makes, it's one of the deepest Rashis in the whole Chumash. He says, wait a minute, Chevron is not a valley, it's in the mountains. So what does it mean he sent him from the valley of Chevron? Geographically, it doesn't make sense. So Rashi says, no, there's like a deep mystical allusion here. It means that he sent him. Now, remember, Emek, Emek, which means valley, also means deep, from the word amok. If something is deep physically or even conceptually, it's very deep. So it's the word emek. So Rashi says what it means is Yaakov sent him from the deep Eitzah. That's the word he uses, the deep advice of the one who is buried in Chevron, Avraham, regarding the Brit Ben Abitarim, the covenant of the pieces. So that's what Rashi says. Rashi says it doesn't mean literally the valley of Chevron, because Chevron is in the mountains. It's not in a valley. So it means that he sent him from the deep Eitzah, the deep, here it really means the deep revelation that was given to Avram, who's buried in Chevron, regarding the prophecy that was given over at the covenant of the pieces. What is that? What is that prophecy? That God revealed to Avram that his children would go down to, doesn't say Egypt, but would go down into exile for 400 years. And then they would be brought back to Israel. And so the whole question, anyone who has Orchard of Delights, and if you go to Parshat Vayeshev, I write extensively about it. Again, this is not the purpose right now, but here there's this whole question as to why Yaakov was sending Yosef to check on his brothers. And by this enigmatic statement that he sent him from the valley of Chevron, hinting that what was about to happen was going to put in motion this prophecy that had been given to Avram. And so what happens? They throw Yosef in a pit. He's sold to Egypt. And that begins the beginning of the exile in Egypt. And so, like I said, this is one of the deepest Rashis and everything that it implies. I'm only kind of alluding to what it implies here. But I'm saying this because here you have a Rashi based on the geographical reality of Chevron. That's why I wanted to bring it. You don't have this, all the time, where the spiritual geography of Israel comes into Rashi's explanation of the text. And here I'll just leave off with a very known midrash. How did Avram, why did he want to bury her in this cave? There are many other places that Avram could have buried her, but he went to great lengths, and he paid an enormous fortune to bury her in this particular cave, 400 pieces of silver. And so the Midrash explains that when the three angels came to announce to Avram and Sarah that they would have a son, so at first he didn't know that they were angels. And this is right after going through circumcision. And he greets who he thought were three actually pagans. And he does what he does to everyone. He feeds them, he serves them, he makes them feel at home. And so, according to tradition, what happened is he needed to it says that he fed them from meat. And so he went looking to get one of his herd, one of his calves, and it ran away. And he was in Hebron, and it runs into a cave. And Avram is determined to get this calf so he can bring it back and slaughter it and serve it to his guests. And it keeps on going deeper and deeper into this cave. And Avram is following it, and he goes around a corner. And when he goes around the corner, Avram is like blasted with light. Just, and he becomes aware that this is the burial place of Adam and Eve. This is the Midrash. And so later, when it comes time to bury Sarah, he knew exactly where he wanted to bury her. And that's why the Torah, the Torah calls it Kiryat Arba. And I didn't give you the second reason. The first reason is because four pairs are buried there: Adam and Eve, Avram and Sarah, Yitzhak and Rivka, Yaakov and Leah. So it's called Kiryat Arba, the city of four. The other one is that there were four giants that lived in Hebron. That was the other tradition. But the point is that when Avram needs to bury Sarah, like I said, he could have buried her anywhere. But he knew that this was the burial place of Adam and Eve. And like I said, in tradition, he also understood that, however we understand this, that this place is the connector between this world and the world to come. Again, for those who have Orchard of Delights in Chayei Sarah, I write about this extensively. And so I'll end with this, is right after he buries Sarah, the Torah says, Avram zaken ba biyamim, Avram berach et Avram bakol. Avram became elderly in wisdom, and God blessed Avram with everything. And the question is, what does it mean he came into days? Ba biyamim. One of the explanations is that because of Hebron being this connection between this world and the world to come, and because Sarah, in a certain way, makes the connection, she's buried in the earth, but her soul continues to exist in the world to come. And so Avram came into days, meaning in this world, he had 1 foot in this world, but already 1 foot in the world to come. He was already connected, chibur, chevron, to the world to come. So tonight we did Sfat, connected to the element of air, Severia connected to the element of water, and Chevron connected to earth. I'm going to keep Jerusalem because we'll need an entire class for it. So thank everyone for coming. And just like Avram was blessed with everything, may we all be blessed with everything good. L'chaim, everyone. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nהיה b'dvaro. Well, we made it to the class without sirens. No guarantee we'll get through the discussion group, though. None at all.